But then Erica contacted me and told me that she was going to be in town, and if we wanted to have a special seminar, I said, yes, definitely. So just a little introduction for Erica. A lot of you already know her, although she was Erica Hudson while she was here. She was a student, graduated in 2013 with a PhD. She studied with Jose Torres. And all that I remember about her dissertation research, it was krill in the Southern Ocean. So
that's about all I remember too.
But she is joined Noaa, and now she's a program manager of the Ocean Acidification Program. And so she's going to tell us what Noaa is doing in ocean acidification science. Eric.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And I see lots of friendly faces in the audience. It's a little weird being back. It's a little bit exactly the same as when I left, with maybe a fresh coat of paint. The password on the computer is exactly the same as when I was in grad school here. But yeah, so I'm going to give you guys a brief whirlwind tour of Noaa's Ocean Acidification Program and the work that we're doing. Like many of you know, none of this work is a solo effort, and the same can be said for us. We're a small staff. With our director, Libby Jewett, Deputy Dwight, myself, our education and outreach person, Jen Mintz, Shalen, who works on the West Coast and does all of our interagency working group coordination, and then we have 2 Sea Grant Fellows, or Knaus Fellows, who are helping us with all the great work that we were doing. So Noaa's Ocean Acidification Program, what's our mission? Our mission, as any federal agency, we all have to have missions and vision statements and all that stuff. Ours is to better prepare society to respond to ocean acidification by fostering interdisciplinary research, monitoring, forecasting, community outreach, engaged through both national and international partnerships. So ocean acidification, if you haven't yet taken chemical oceanography, you probably don't know this yet, but if you have, you should all know this. Bob Byrne, I'm sure, told you that ocean acidification happens when you get increased CO2 in the atmosphere, which then, through equilibration with the ocean, goes into the ocean, which causes an increased carbon dioxide in the ocean. This, because of the increased hydrogen ions, because of this chemical reaction, causes a decrease in pH, which then causes a decrease in carbonate ions. Okay, well that's cool, chemistry. Why do we care? So ocean acidification is something that carbonate chemists have been predicting for years. In fact, on the cover of Pilson's chemical oceanography book, you'll see a very classic graph depicting ocean acidification. So it's not something that we were surprised by, but what did surprise us is the time frame that it happened on. On the West Coast, oyster hatcheries in the early 2000s experienced severe mortality of their early life stage larvae, and they went through all the normal things. Could it be a Vibrio? Is it a weird temperature thing? Is there something in our system that got contaminated? And none of the usual suspects were the cause. And then in working with academics and Noaa scientists, the owners were finally able to determine that their high mortality rate was due to ocean acidification and was linked to the carbonate chemistry. And as we've come to discover, it's not just the simple story of CO2 from the atmosphere mixing in the air-sea exchange. There's all these other complicating factors. The chemistry is, on a regional and local level, can be exacerbated. So on the West Coast, the story was the upwelling of the older acidic deep water coming up during these upwelling events and coming right up to close to the surface. And the hatchery intake valves were taking up this upwelled water, and it was really causing an issue for them. But in other areas, you have riverine discharge, which can change the alkalinity and also can contribute nutrients, which can contribute to algal blooms, which can then contribute to biological acidification events, which you get from production and respiration. So there's all kinds of things happening in the coastal zone that make the chemistry a lot more challenging than just a simple flux. So Congress decided to do something, and they passed the Federal Ocean Acidification Research and Monitoring Act in 2009. And what this act did was it established an interagency working group, which you can see represented here. And in specific, it called on Noaa to establish an ocean acidification program to conduct research and monitoring of ocean acidification. It called on NSF to conduct targeted competitive research calls for ocean acidification. And it called on NASA to ensure that there are space-based assets that can be applied to ocean acidification. So the ocean acidification program in NOAA was formed, and working with the interagency working group here with all these federal partners, we all work together to monitor ocean acidification, to study the species and ecosystem response, to coordinate our data management, to do modeling of acidification, and to discover adaptation strategies, technology development, and also education and outreach. So a little bit more about the federal level, the federal coordination. So the interagency working group, as I mentioned, studies all these various aspects, and each agency has their own niche. So for example, NOAA does a lot of monitoring and modeling, data management, species response research. But for example, NSF does technology, so does NASA. NASA also does modeling. So each agency has their own mandates that fit into specific pieces of this puzzle here. And those are all called out in the strategic plan, which was published in 2014. And since then, we have a federal implementation plan for the monitoring and research of ocean acidification. So if you're ever curious as to what a specific agency is planning to do in regards to ocean acidification, that's a great resource. Another great resource is every 2 years, we have to give a report to Congress that describes how all the different federal agencies, what they've done in 2 years to address ocean acidification. So if you're interested in what we plan to do, check out the strategic plan and the implementation plan. If you're interested in figuring out what's happened in the last couple years, you can read these biennial reports, and all these can be found on our website, which I put on the board over there. But if you just Google ocean acidification and NOAA, it'll come up. And we're on the 4th biennial report, has already been published, and we're drafting the 5th one as we speak. So I guess be prepared. It'll come out probably early next year. It's really exciting stuff, I know. We're also working on an information exchange, which any of you who are involved with the Arctic work, there's the IARPIC group that has like an online information exchange, and we're working to build that same kind of community. And we're envisioning that this is a platform to foster engagement and a sense of community of the researchers in the US, and gives individuals and organizations a way to engage and learn about OA and to find others to interact and collaborate with virtually, and also allows innovation through this interaction and self-tasking that you can happen, or that you can get with this online tool. And that's coming soon. We're hoping to roll that out in early 2018. So if you're going to Ocean Sciences in 2018, we're going to be having a workshop where we highlight, or not a town hall, where we highlight this information exchange and kind of roll it out. So we not only coordinate among the other federal agencies, we also coordinate internationally with other scientists. And we've created this in partnership with other countries. We've created the Global Ocean Acidification Observing Network, which is a network of almost 400 scientists from about 70 different countries. You can see there's a lot listed here, and you probably can't read it unless you have really good eyesight. But if you check out our website, there are links to the Global OA Network there, and you can investigate further if you're interested in finding out more about the different countries involved. And there's 3 high-level goals for this global network. One is to improve our understanding of OA conditions, and that's mainly done through monitoring. The second goal is to improve our understanding of the biological and the ecosystem response to ocean acidification. And the last is to acquire and exchange data and knowledge which was required to really optimize the forecasts and understand the impacts of ocean acidification. So one way we've been working at getting at the data aspect and the data access aspect is we have this data portal, which you can see here a bunch of different cruise tracks, and we encourage all of the network members to report on any observations or monitoring that they conduct. So you can see there's some buoys here, some cruise tracks. Some of these are repeated cruises, some are just a one-time cruise. But if you click on them, it'll give you the metadata for that. So at the very least, you would be able to find out who the PI is, and you can contact them if you want to find out more information about their data. Some of them have real-time data, or not real-time data reporting, but they have some data reporting on those, and most of those I think are the US-based ones. But we're working hard with our international partners to increase this, increase the reporting of this map so we can really use this to see, you know, where are the gaps in our knowledge, where do we need to focus our efforts. And they also have some really interesting data layers, which they've pulled in from GLODAP and SOCAT, which are these international data synthesizing products. So if you're interested in more in that, go ahead and check out the data portal, which again we link to from our website. And another thing we're doing is doing capacity building internationally. So not every country has the scientific capacity to study ocean acidification, even if they are interested in it. So we have a couple different ways that we're addressing that. We have peer-to-peer, which is a really catchy way to have the title for our mentoring program, where we have mentors and mentees from different countries for a knowledge exchange to hopefully encourage collaborations and joint experiments across national boundaries, but also for developed countries to really help out in developing countries where there's less scientific capacity. We also do direct assistance where through the State Department and other various foundations, they provide sensor kits to developing countries that are interested in monitoring ocean acidification but lack the means to do so, and also training workshops. Okay, so we went over how we coordinate things federally, we went over how we coordinate with the international group. Now I'm going to do a little dive into nationally what the program does, and I'll try to highlight some of the work that we do in the Gulf. So we do monitoring. It's a very big part of what NOAA does. We monitor ocean acidification in lots of different ways. So we have dedicated hydrographic cruises in Alaska, along the west coast, in the Gulf of Mexico, and the east coast. These cruises occur once a year. In fact, the Gulf of Mexico cruise just ended, I think a couple days ago. Bob, I think you had some people on the boat.
Some of them are here today.
There you go. So they're already back. So if you want to hear more about how that cruise went, someone in the back row can tell you about that. And next year we have the cruise going off on the East Coast. We also have volunteer observing ships, or ships of opportunity, where we put a autonomous underway map CO2 on the ship, and it monitors the surface PCO2 and a few other parameters. And there's also moorings, buoys, and then we sometimes use wave gliders or sail drones. We have some sail drones out in Alaska and the Arctic right now. But yeah, so those are some of the ways we do monitoring. And from these cruises, like the one that just happened in the Gulf, you can get these great maps of carbonate parameters, which can kind of give you a snapshot and what's happening in the region. So now if we zoom into the Gulf, this is a cruise track of the GOMEC, or the Gulf of Mexico cruise, from a couple years ago. And we also have a buoy up near the Mississippi Bight. We also have another mooring on that's planned to go in on Flower Garden Banks. And this is the cruise track, what was supposed to happen on the GOMEC cruise. If you talk to anyone who's out there, I guess you guys all know there was a hurricane. Hurricane Franklin sort of derailed the cruise a bit, but from what I hear, you're still able to get a lot of those cruise lines done. Aside from just chemistry monitoring, we partner with the Coral Reef Conservation Program to do some biological and ecological monitoring. So the Coral Reef Conservation Program, they do cruise track or reef tracks where they take photo mosaics of the reef, which you can kind of see here, and then they can track the coral reef health through time. And they also measure a lot of other things, looking at biodiversity, do fish counts, and what we contribute is we add the carbonate chemistry monitoring, so you get both the chemistry and the paired biological observations, so that hopefully with these paired time series data, you can really tease apart some of these long-term trends due to climate change and ocean acidification. So why do we care about biology? How do we think ocean acidification is going to impact species? Well, there's a lot of generalized impacts that can happen due to low pH or aragonite saturation, including decreased or changing calcification, growth, reproduction, recruitment, survivability, or mortality, as we saw in the case of the early life stages of oysters. And we've even seen lots of interesting behavior work where ocean acidification can impact or disrupt behavior pathways. So we suspect early life stages are the most susceptible, and we also suspect that calcifying organisms are also the most sensitive to ocean acidification. So to date, our program, just our program, which is a very small program, we currently have $10 million to spend on ocean acidification research, so it's not everything that's funded by the entire federal government, but just our program has funded all of these species to date. The boxes that are circled in green are the boxes where ocean acidification has increased the growth. So you see some diatoms up here, which you'd kind of expect. And then there's some species where we're not really seeing an effect, so maybe they're more resilient to ocean acidification, which is good, that not everything is having a negative impact. And then, shellfish and crustaceans, and then a few fish that we've investigated to date, we're seeing some negative impacts due to ocean acidification. And then the rest of these species are ones that we're currently investigating and are eagerly awaiting those publications. So, okay, well, aside from the fact that there's physiologists out there who really like to torture animals in labs, why do we care about, as a physiologist, I can say that, why do we care about understanding the biological sensitivity of these organisms? Because what we really care about are people, and that's also what people mostly care about, is other people. So by understanding and monitoring the environment, combining that with our knowledge of the species sensitivity, we can then start to begin to understand how ocean acidification can then affect human communities. So there's a really interesting paper that came out in 2015 by Ekstrom et al. Titled "The Vulnerability and Adaptation of the U.S. Shell Fisheries to Ocean Acidification." And what they looked at was the sensitivity, which they did the sensitivity of the various shell fisheries based on the research that was out there, and then combining that with the adaptive capacity of the human communities. So different ways that they looked at that were, was there a large diversity in the fisheries there? Could the fishermen switch to another fishery? What's the education level of the fishery or the communities? And those that are highlighted in red have a high social vulnerability to ocean acidification. And as you can see along the Gulf, there's a lot of red. So there could be a high social vulnerability to ocean acidification in this region. So sort of ending or wrapping up the story that we began in the beginning with the oyster's tail, how do we move forward? So knowing that ocean acidification is happening, it's getting worse, it's not getting better, how can we adapt and change and move forward? On the West Coast, the oyster hatcheries are working with researchers to monitor the water chemistry coming in their intake. And what they've been able to do is find these really low events and these these sort of thresholds, and they'll either turn off their intake for their hatcheries or they'll treat the water so they don't get huge die-offs of their larvae, which is great when you're a hatchery and you can, just turn the water off when it's bad, but you can't just turn the water off everywhere, and if you live in the ocean, you're going to have to probably come up with something else. So that's why we need lots more research done on this. We're also working with some scientists on the West Coast to do some modeling, and they're creating some seasonal forecasts of oxygen, sea surface temperature, and pH, which they're trying to help them correlate into various fisheries management practices. So for the Dungeness crab and for oysters, to help them plan for their seasons. Also, using some of the work that's been done in the Alaska Fisheries Science Center on the crabs, they take the information from the physiology, the experiments on the different life stages, and they put that into fisheries stock assessment models, and then put that into bioeconomic models, and with that they can do the projection of the stock without acidification, and then the projection of what will happen to the stock under ocean acidification conditions. And as you can see from the graph, it's not looking so good for the red king crab industry. But that's, there's a lot of other things happening in the environment as well. This is just one model projection, including ocean acidification. But this can help inform the fisheries managers to let them know, this is something you might want to consider as you're making your future fisheries management plans. So one really important thing that our program does, and that I hope I can communicate to you guys, is connecting the science back to society through our education and outreach efforts. So our program has worked with the Noaa education program to create a Noaa-wide ocean a Noaa-wide OA education implementation plan. And they also have conducted an education needs assessment, so going out and talking to various different kinds of educators, be that at the high school level or above, and asking them, what do you need to communicate ocean acidification? Because like I said, it's a complex, it's complex carbonate chemistry, which can be tricky to describe to people and help them understand. And from this needs assessment, we created a targeted mini grant competition to help fill the gaps that were identified in the needs assessment. And we also do a webinar called the SOURCE webinar series, which the SOURCE stands for Sharing Ocean Acidification Resources for Communicators and Educators. And the goal of this webinar series is really so that not every communicator and educator has to reinvent the wheel. They can learn from what other people have developed in their own classrooms. And that webinar series is starting back up in September, and we'll be focusing on mobilizing citizen science to create awareness for our changing ocean. And I believe we also have archived the webinars in the past, so you can go and see if there's a specific talk or a specific technique that you might be interested in if you're a communicator or educator. And that also can be found on our website. So another way that we do education and outreach is through these coastal acidification networks, or as we like to call them in the office, CANs. The very first one started on the West Coast. It's called the California Current Acidification Network. And what they really were was a roundtable of scientists and industry and interested stakeholders who sort of saw what happened in Washington and Oregon and wanted to have these roundtable discussions where they were able to, the industry members were able to ask their questions of the scientists and really interact and see if they can, figure out other things that are going on and try to be more proactive. In other regions, the Northeast Coastal Acidification Network is a similar group. There's one in the Southeast, there's one in Alaska, and we just have a new one in the Gulf and in the Mid-Atlantic. So what are these CANs? They really are a way for scientists and government and communicators and industry and different people to get together and communicate science and and ask their questions in a less formal, more local and regional way. They help organize the information and ask the questions like what and how should we as a region or we as a state respond to this in our area. And they also highlight what is special about the region. So in the Northeast, they did a State of the Science series where they went around asking all the various people who are researching carbonate chemistry in the area, you know, what's happening in the Northeast that's different than what's happening everywhere else. And what they discovered in the Northeast is that the increased freshwater input that they're getting from the increased rain, which is happening because of climate change, is really changing and driving some of the local carbonate chemistry up there with the increased freshwater input. But as I mentioned in the beginning, all chemistry is local, so you know it's really important to understand what are the drivers in your specific region. And then these people in the cans can then become a trusted source. You know, they work together, they know each other on a face-to-face basis, and they interact with their community members, and really can become a trusted source for ocean acidification information in the region. So in the Gulf region, you have GCAN, which is the Gulf of Mexico Coastal Acidification Network. It's a collaboration between GCOOS, which is your regional IUS association, our program, and a bunch of other federal and state agency representatives, resource managers, industry partners, research scientists, and stakeholders located around the Gulf. Their mission is to identify direct and indirect impacts of OA on the Gulf of Mexico marine ecosystem and to help develop strategies to mitigate the impacts by fostering collaboration and increasing observations across the region. So if you're interested in learning more about this new group, contact Jennifer Vreeland at gcoos.org, and I can get you that email address at the end if you're interested. You guys are lucky in that you also have another can that you can choose from. There's also the Southeast Ocean and Coastal Acidification Network, which starts up in North Carolina and wraps around Florida. And they just had a monitoring workshop earlier this year, I think in January or February, where they were trying to figure out what monitoring is already happening and where should we prioritize research or monitoring in the region. They're also working on getting a monitoring portal up and going in partnership with Sakura. And they're planning some stakeholder workshops. The first one is slated for October in North Carolina, and the other ones for South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, they have not yet decided on a date. But the goal of these stakeholder workshops is to introduce coastal and ocean acidification and discuss the impacts with the stakeholders, to really ask the stakeholders, you know, what are their concerns, and then to identify the research and data needs in the region, and then hopefully to form partnerships to help move the monitoring and research forward. So if you're interested in becoming a member, on their webpage, there's a little link here where you can enter your name and info there, and you can link to we have a link to this webpage from our webpage. And as I have been saying throughout my talk, if you need more information or access to data, please visit our website. And that's, I think, all I have for now. You have any questions?